Hi, I'm Thomas A. Bradley. I'm a multi award winning horror author, and I thought with the upcoming season of Halloween, we should have some fun. And I thought maybe I would share my novella, Sundown Rising, with my friends and fans. Short history. This is comprised of two short stories. The first one is called Weeping Willow, and I wrote that and sold that to a magazine and someplace else, which I'll discuss when we finish. I don't want to give anything away. Anyway, after reading it through it, I came up with an idea for a sequel, which I did. That would be part two, called The Progeny. And when I put them together, I ended up with a novella. So I guess without further ado, I will be reading through this story every Tuesday and Thursday at this time at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time until that changes in October. But it'll still be 4 hours UTC time plus my two. So I suppose we might as well just begin and see what happens. So, part one, Weeping Willow. I wasn't entirely sure that I was doing the right thing as I signed the last of the pages in front of me. Something about it still felt very wrong. After all, it was my wife, Ronnie, who had wanted the house so badly. Nothing I said could dissuade her. As I slid the completed forms across the table to the realtor and handed her my closing check, I wished that Ronnie could be here. I wished with all my heart that Christopher Randolph had not been drunk. I wished that he had not been fiddling with his CD player. I wished that he had not jumped the curb and run into the telephone pole that stood in front of our house. And most of all, I wished that stupid splinter of wood that he'd sent flying hadn't ripped into my wife's femoral artery. Congratulations, said the realtor, extending her hand. You got yourself a fine fixer-upper. Congratulations. She was pumping my hand as if she were trying to get an old well restarted. It brought me back from my wishing. Thank you, was all I said. She smiled, then handed me the keys. Her face was literally aglow with the thoughts of the commission on this one. A tidy sum, I suspected, for a house that just sold for $427,000. Now, if there's anything else you need, anything we at Carlton's Realties can do to help you get settled, you just call. She handed me a folder of papers and brochures. Here's the startup package. Your electric, phone, cable, trash, all taken care of and up and running. She shot me another salesman's smile. Everything you need to settle in has already been done. Of course, you can always change things whenever you want, but you're all set. It took about 25 minutes to get to the house, 5 of which was negotiating the long, winding driveway. The house that sat on 12 acres of wooded land, one of the things that Ronnie had loved about it. There was also a lot of work to be done to the house and the property, another thing Ronnie loved. She was the handyman, not I. I was more the call in the pros type. The lawn was totally overgrown. Patches of grass and weeds stood 2 to 3 feet high in places. A gnarled tree limb stretched across the driveway just short of the front porch. It laid there like an oversized snake, its mottled back flanked away in places. Shelf fungus was starting to take over, and the large white discs scattered along its length stood out like skin cancer. Had it come down another 3 feet to the left, it would have taken out the whole corner of the house. I rolled up to it in my old CJ7, skidding to a stop on the thinned out gravel. The first thing I noticed when I climbed out of the Jeep was the sweet smell of flowering trees, a stark contrast to the death and decay that surrounded the property. The house was in no better shape than the lawn, probably a lot worse. The roof had definitely seen better days. Here and there, shingles had fallen away, giving the house a balding look. The paint was puckered and flaking, and the glass was missing or broken from most of the windows. It was a large house and was going to take quite an investment in time and money to get it back to where it should be. But standing there in the driveway, I couldn't help but see what Ronnie had seen in it. I tried to imagine what it used to look like 210 years ago when it had been built, sprawling and majestic. The stone foundations perfectly pointed, the wood siding clean and blemish-free, and the gables freshly peaked above the surrounding trees. I jingled the keys in my hand as I clattered up the wooden steps to the front door. A light breeze whirled across the porch, sending dry leaves skittering in front of me. Turning the tarnished brass knob, I pushed lightly and stepped inside. The musty odor of disuse assaulted me immediately. "Well, Richard Anthony Millay, here we are." "Here you are," I said. "What do you think, Ronnie? Are you happy? Is this what you wanted?" I moved into the room, the naked floorboards creaking and groaning in protest. "You do know, of course, my dear, that it's going to take a professional cleaning crew just to get all the dust out of here, don't you?" I looked around, then smiled to myself. "I'd be willing to bet that you don't even care." I slowly made my way around the house, taking mental notes about what I thought needed to be done first, just to make it livable. I considered moving into one of those short-term rental places, like the Ambassador Suites or something similar, while the place was being worked on. But I decided that would probably make Ronnie very unhappy, so I made the best of what was. It took 3 months of solid work, and I can't begin to tell you how many contractors, but the place was finally shaping up. The lawn was green and living at an acceptable height. The weeds were pulled and sprayed. All the windows and shingles had been replaced and the floors refinished. 9 of the 11 rooms were totally complete. The other 2, one on the 3rd floor and a small sitting room off the kitchen, still needed some plaster and paint. One of the first things I did was to get my office in shape. I was a copywriter, which meant being able to work comfortably from home. I chose a large room on the 2nd floor which overlooked the back of the house. There was a weeping willow that stood some 30 yards from the house that was visible through my office window. I had always liked the look of those trees, which is why I chose the room. A small stream meandered across the property. It wound its way past the small cemetery plot that held the ground to the left of the house. The original owners were living there. In a sense, I guess they never really gave up the property. There were 4 marked graves inside a broken and rusting wrought iron fence. I wasn't sure whether I was going to have it repaired or not. It was something I'd have to think about. The little graveyard itself was not a concern. Actually, it was another one of those quirky things that Ronnie had found so charming about the place. When we'd first shown interest in the house, the realtor asked if it was going to be a problem. She told us that we could have the bodies moved over to Summit Lawn if we wanted. There was no existing family to object. Ronnie said she thought it added to the property and that would be fine right where it was. She was a big believer in ghosts and things of that nature, and she liked the spookiness of it, as she called it, that imparted to the house. So we let it stay. I let it stay. The house was really too big for one person, too big for me. It took me several months to adjust to its creaking and settling, especially at night. There were many times in the beginning when I thought I'd heard footsteps coming and going up and down the hall stairs, but each time proved to be just the house doing its own kind of breathing. A few times I'd been certain that I'd heard a door slam downstairs or a window open and then close. I kept telling myself that it was Ronnie who was the ghost believer, not me, but that would change. It was a warm July night, not too many days from the start of August. I don't remember the date exactly, but I do remember that evening, that night. I had been in my office working on a particularly difficult white paper for a company in Philadelphia. I must have rewritten it 8 times. There was a little round brass clock that sat on my desk that chimed on each hour. Chilling, 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 chilling. 7 o'clock. Time to give it a rest. I walked over to the window and stood there admiring my willow, hands in my pockets. I'm not sure how long I stood there looking at it, probably 5 minutes or so, when I noticed a reflection in the glass. I remember that it startled me so much I actually let out a little gaspy whimper. When I turned around, there was nothing behind me. But when I turned back again to look at the window, there it was. A tall, dark-haired woman appeared to be standing behind me, looking directly at me. She was standing perfectly still and seemed to be looking past me, through me, out the window. I turned to look again, but I was still the only one in the room. A shiver ran up my spine, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck actually rising. Not being the ghost aficionado, I wasn't quite sure what to do. Actually, I was pretty much convinced that I'd just been working too hard and that I probably needed a drink and a good night's sleep. Thinking it pretty silly, but doing it anyway, I raised my hand and waved. The reflection didn't move. I thought about saying something to it, but dismissed that idea. No need to punctuate crazy. So I just stood there looking at it through the glass until it faded. "Oh, Richard," I said, "just because it's your name doesn't mean you have to be one. There are no such things as ghosts, and you know it. You're a copywriter, not a horror writer." I kept staring into the glass as I said this, as if the image might reappear just to prove me wrong. It didn't. I was almost to the door when I heard the voice. It was a soft, whispery sound, and it was edged with sadness and despair. "Richard, Richard, you've come," was all it said. At least that's what I heard. I turned around. The room was empty, and there were no reflections in any of the windows save my own. I walked back over to the window. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, turning the sky that pinkish purple color. An intermittent breeze was blowing, and the long hanging branches of the willow would sweep to one side and then fall back again. It reminded me of how Ronnie's hair looked whenever we had the top down on the Jeep. I waited 10, 15, 20 minutes. There was no repeat voice or any visions or reflections. Finally convincing myself that I hadn't seen or heard anything, I went downstairs. The rest of that night was uneventful. I watched some TV, read a little, and then went to bed. There were no strange dreams, no disembodied voices, no unexplained sounds. In fact, I can't remember ever having had a better night's sleep. Feeling pretty good, I made myself a full breakfast, something I rarely ever did. Toast, coffee, 2 eggs over easy, some potatoes O'Brien, and bacon. I figured it was going to be a good day if we could just get a handle on that white paper. It was due in 2 days, so I didn't have a lot of time. I stacked all the breakfast ware in the sink and headed up to my office. Halfway up the steps, I felt something bump into me. It was a substantial feeling that pushed me back a step, forcing me to grab the handrail. I could feel my heart beating in my chest. I watched in amazement and fear as a line of frost formed at the top of the steps on the banister and then swept down the handrail. At the bottom, it condensed into itself and disappeared. I stood there numb for quite some time, trying to regain what little sanity I thought I had left. Forcing myself to enter into things I'd rather not and abandon my disbelief in the spirit world, I said a bit timidly, "Okay, who's there? What do you want?" There was no answer. Of course, I really didn't expect one. Then I heard the tapping. It was distant and coming from upstairs, barely audible. It sounded like plastic being knocked together, and I recognized it immediately. It was a sound I heard every day, the sound of my computer keyboard being used. I raced up the steps, sure I'd find someone in my office, someone who'd gone to a lot of trouble to try and scare me. I stood in the hallway, a few feet from my office door, listening. It was definitely my keyboard. On tiptoe, I crept toward the open door, my back against the wall. When I reached the jamb, I leaped into the doorway. The tapping stopped. The room was empty. Hesitantly, I walked over to my desk. The monitor was showing my rotating screensaver, personal pictures and cartoons that I had uploaded or downloaded. I placed my finger on the mouse and not really sure if I wanted to move it. Finally, I brought my finger forward and brought the screen to life. I gave in and pushed it. When what came up on the screen made me back up so suddenly that I lost my balance and nearly went crashing out the second-story window. On the screen in front of me, printed in bold Times Roman, were the words, "Get the hell out of my house now," written over and over and over again, all the way down the page, all the same, except for the last line. And I think, more than anything, it was the last line that frightened me the most. It read, "Get the hell out of M." This scared me most because it was evidence that whoever or whatever had been using my computer had been interrupted in mid-sentence by my appearance in the doorway. This I couldn't deny, and now I was stuck believing, and that scared the hell out of me too. I really had no idea what to do. I wanted to sit down, but was afraid to even use my own chair. What I wanted most was a rational explanation for all of it. I couldn't find one. Hell, I couldn't even invent one. I was staggered, my sense of reality riddled with holes that I couldn't patch up. I thought that under the circumstances, a nice walk outdoors might do me some good. I left my office behind and stepped out onto the front porch. It was already getting warm, and it was only 9:05 a.m. I moved down the steps and swung to my right, headed for the backyard. My head cleared a little, and my heart had stopped playing the congas in my chest. The sound of the birds singing and the crickets chirping helped restore me. As I rounded the far side of the house, I noticed that someone or something had trampled the marigolds I had planted there. Probably a deer or rabbit, I thought. A little farther on, I began to become concerned. The lilac bush I'd planted in Ronnie's memory, her favorite, was broken completely in two. No rabbit that I ever saw or would want to see could do that. Again, that sickening feeling of fear of the unknown began to seize me. I stood there like a statue, just staring at the broken bush. Then I caught something out of the corner of my eye. There was something underneath the bush, lying up against the foundation. I leaned over and lifted a few of the broken lilac branches. Whatever it was, and I couldn't tell from where I was standing, it was kind of orange in color and fairly large. I got down on my hands and knees and crawled in under the bush. It was a dead cat. Leaning as far in as I could get, the branches pushing back against my face, I felt around until I could get a hold of it. When I finally extricated it from under the bushes, I could clearly see that its neck had been broken. Its head swiveled around like it was on ball bearings. "Christ," I muttered. Feeling kind of bad for the poor animal. "What happened to you?" As soon as I finished the sentence, the thing opened its eyes and gave out a loud hiss. Its claws swiped frantically at me, ripping my arms open. I dropped it and stepped back, but it continued its attack. It leaped for my face, but I was able to swat it away. It crouched on the ground in front of me, hissing and yowling. I took a few more steps backward. It crawled forward, its head rolling from side to side. Searching for anything I could use as a weapon while keeping a wary eye on the cat, I continued to backpedal, one step at a time. The contractors had been thorough. There wasn't even a twig lying around that I could use. I thought about rushing it, hoping it might just run off, but seemed more foolish than wise. For a few moments, we just stared at each other. Then it stood on its hind legs, something I didn't even think was possible for a cat. "Get the hell out of here," it yelled, and then fell over dead again. Warily, I inched toward it. No movement. Standing directly over it, I gave it a good kick. It rolled across the yard like a limp doll. I had to be sure, so I gave it another good kick, this time lifting it into the air. It thudded to the ground, limp and motionless. "So much for you," I said, not even realizing that I was now talking to the dead. "A shovel and a trash pail, and you're out of here." The "out of here" part I said as if I were announcing a home run at a ball game. When I returned with plastic bag and shovel in hand, the cat was gone. I should have been surprised. I should have been awed. I was neither. At this point, the weird was becoming normal, but that didn't mean I was feeling good about any of it. So much for my walk, too. I went back into the house and up to my office. Ghosts or no ghosts, I had work to do. The office was empty, and I went undisturbed for the rest of the day, except for the occasional draw I felt to stop working and just admire the willow out my window. There was something very captivating about it. Sitting there, staring out the window, I wandered back in time. I could feel the tears welling up as I thought of how Ronnie and I used to walk for hours through the woods. We'd take an entire Saturday and just spend it walking along. We talked about everything: the past, the future, even the present, and how we were going to meet the next electric bill. I remember the time we pulled in off the path and made love on the leaves during a sudden shower. I could still feel the texture of her wet skin beneath my fingers. Before I could stop it, the tears turned into a full crying jag, my whole body racked with grief, and never again to be filled with longing. At first, I hardly noticed the feeling, but as my sobbing ceased crying, I could distinctly feel a hand stroking the back of my head. I sat bolt upright and swiveled around. There was no one there. I was about to get up when I had an idea. Slowly, I swiveled my chair around so that I faced the window. As I raised the blinds, hoping the willow would cast enough shadow to cause a reflection in the window, I could see her. She appeared thinner, more drawn out than previously, but that was probably due to the brightness of the afternoon. Standing about 2 feet behind me, the woman I'd seen the other night was holding a finger to her lips, a silent gesture for me to be quiet. I ignored it and opened my mouth to speak, and could see my breath when I did. "Who are you?" I asked. The woman lowered her hand to her side. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear anything. She moved forward, seeming more to glide than to walk, and pointed. I thought she was pointing at me and didn't understand what she meant. This time, she mouthed the words. She was speaking very slowly, and I understood. She wanted me to open the window. I rolled my chair forward, afraid that if I stood, she'd disappear. Grabbing the sash hooks with both hands, I lifted the window. "I knew you'd come, Richard," she said. I could hear her. Her voice was carried on the breeze outside. It was as if the wind were her lungs. "I knew you would never abandon me." Her long white gown rustled with the breeze, and I noticed that its movements matched those of the willow's branches. When they swayed, so did her dress. And when the breeze died out, so did her voice. "How do you know me?" I asked. She waited. The air was still outside. With the next wisp of wind came the reply. "How could I not know you, my love?" Losing myself in this, I absent-mindedly turned to face her. She wasn't there. Or rather, I couldn't see her. It seemed that she was only visible as a reflection. But when I turned back, the room behind me was empty. From that moment on, the window in my office was never to be closed. So I think that's probably a good place to stop for right now. As you know, I have noticed anyway, I'm not a professional narrator. I'm just me. I don't have a fancy studio. I don't have, uh, you know, uh, backdrops and soundproof rooms. And so you kind of get what you want, which sometimes may include dogs barking and people knocking at the door. It's just the way it is. But I hope you enjoyed the first part. If you did, then let me know with a thumbs up. If you didn't, that's okay. And you can put a thumbs down too. If you'd like, you can subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon so you get the notifications. And as I also said, I will be repeating these on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So the next episode will come this Thursday at 2 o'clock my time, 6 o'clock UTC. Until then, I hope everybody stays well and healthy and is getting ready for a good and fun and scary Halloween season. Take care for now and see you next time. Bye.